A few thoughts today around that sermon title, Jerusalem, Washington. I think we owe it to ourselves in days like these to grant each other the respect to speak with honesty, to love the truth, and to live with integrity. We want us to speak about what is happening in our nation and perhaps across the world. It may be difficult to find hope. And I'm not talking about a false hope, the pie in the sky story that you tell each other, or something like positive thinking and all that cannot sustain you when the rubber meets the road, but real hope that you have to find within reality and the reality that you face and that surrounds you. In one sense, it is very easy to speak to what we observe and experience around us. We can say, yeah, we will probably experience a second wave of the COVID virus hitting us. And if I can express hope about that, is that we hope that it will not be as severe as the first one, with a high toll that was extracted from our nation. That's a hope, it's not an expectation. Let me just clarify that. Secondly, to speak to the death of George Floyd, the one death that set this nation on fire. To speak to that is, on the one hand, easy, but also, on the other hand, extremely complex. It is simple to speak to the truth that, according to our Constitution, we are all equal. We're all created equal, and we should be equal in the way that the system treats us. It is simple to say that, yes, the way that justice was meted out to George is abhorrent. And it's terrible. I can't get it out of my mind. And I think many people suffer with the image of that video. What's even more horrible is that we know that is not the only case in which it happened. It is also simple to say, yes, there must be reform. And I think everybody will agree on that. I think even in these days when we see everything through a hyper-clear partisan lens, we can all agree on the one thing, that Washington is a bit messed up. When we start to inquire about what does it mean when we say that Washington is messed up, then the partisan lens gives us different answers to it. Then it becomes very complex again. Images that are disturbing, apart from that video of George Floyd dying. So those images of barricades being erected around the White House, of protesters exercising their First Amendment right in peace, being dispersed in in a way that I think is not appropriate for our republic. It is disturbing also, and it adds to the complexity of the whole mix of what we see, that we see so much destruction and so much looting. And again, it's simple to say that's unacceptable, it should not happen. It gets more complex when we ask again, what are the causes of that violence? And then we get totally different responses and answers. That is the reality that we are confronted with, that we have to deal with. I was trying to make it my responsibility and part of my trying to endure this time, which brought immense sadness to me, to try and flip channels on channel TV when I could get myself to watch it, because I think most of us have reached a saturation point as well. It's amazing the two different Americas that we live in, depending on which channel we watch. I've mentioned that I was filled with sadness over the past 2 weeks. Sadness that we have arrived at this point, that when I spoke 5 years ago on Memorial Day and said, God help America if we do not get the toxicity out of our public discourse. I'm not surprised that we've ended up here, but I'm still shocked that it went thus far. And it was disturbing, and it saddened me when I was thinking of 3 years ago when I spoke about, or was it 4 years, about the resiliency of life and our institutions, but also the vulnerability. How tenable it is that once you push it far enough, it will disintegrate. To read that George Packer wrote the following recently about the demonstrations. Demonstrators are hammering on a hollow structure, and it very well may collapse. The urban unrest of the mid to late 1960s was more intense than the days and nights of protests since George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis policeman. More people died then, more buildings were gutted, more businesses were ransacked, but those years had one advantage over the present. America was coming apart at the seams, but it still had seams. The streets were filled with demonstrators raging against the system, but there was still a system to tear down. Its institutions were basically intact. A few leaders in and outside government even exercised some moral authority. Now, I don't necessarily agree with what George Packer said, maybe to an extent. But the sadness and the profound sadness that settled into me made me think of this call of despair of Jesus over Jerusalem, over Israel. There were a few prophets that were killed, most of them just driven out of Jerusalem. But these words from the prophet, I wanted to unite you. I wanted to gather you in love. In these days when we observe what is happening around us, in these days when we read the commentary and the analysis of people, and when we hear words of war, and people like the Boogaloo movement openly inciting the continuation or the repeat of civil war, let us remember that even though we have to live in this moment, that we have to look past the present as well, with hope towards the future. And let us remember there will be a time for uniting, for gathering in the people again, for rebuilding in a time of healing. Let us now, in this pivotal, in this pregnant time, not be slaves of rage. Let fear not be our guide. And let us, with resilient wisdom, listen to the prophets that were also killed before. And I just want to mention two, Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. I can hear their voices today in Washington and across this nation. And let me quote Abraham Lincoln in his first inaugural address, 1861. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. And let us remember the words of Martin Luther King. In that I have a dream speech. I have a dream that we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We've gathered around the communion table today. We celebrated communion. It doesn't only have meaning as the recollection and remembrance of a sacrificial death as atonement. As I've said, it is also an expression of the central message of Jesus. It isn't God's dream for the world, the microcosm of a world of acceptance of equality, of justice. And let our participation in this meal today be an expression of our firm commitment to live up to our creed. Let us listen to our prophets, but especially the prophet who brought us this meal. Let our participation be a firm commitment, no longer to be manipulated by those who want to sow anger and hate and division. Let us look upon each other with compassion. And let us, through our participation, express the firm commitment to see that justice is done, so that the words of Martin Luther King, "Free at last," may again ring with new meaning. Let us unite on these ideals of justice for all, of equality. Let this be a new beginning, this pregnant, and in the one sense terrible, but also in another sense a promising time. What is happening is not who we are. What it speaks of is not who we are. What it exposes is not what should be. But let us find one another in the truths that I hope we can agree that we hold sacred. And listen to the prophet of peace, the peace that he spoke about, the peace that is not enforced by violence, but a peace that results from justice. Amen.